Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So perhaps the people in the kitchen could be invited to end their conversation. Or join us out here. I apologise in advance for being a bit croaky. I've had a very ruddy cold over the last couple of days, so I'm just coming around from that. Now the theme for the first talk of this rasa is what does it mean to be a Buddha? What does it mean to be a Buddha? So this seemed like a good way of opening the season's talks and reflections. We call ourselves Buddhists, or people who are interested in Buddhist practice, and we gather together. We call this a Buddhist monastery. But what do we mean when we use the word Buddha? And it probably means to say 50, 80 people, 100 people perhaps listening to this, then it probably mean 50, 80, 100 different things. So that the word has many different connotations or suggestions to different people according to our own backgrounds, our own conditioning. But in terms of the Buddhist scriptures and mythology, to be a Buddha is a part of a lineage. So the Buddha described himself as just being one in a succession of Buddhas from previous ages, way back into the mists of time. And so that he described how at various periods a fully enlightened being arises in the world and establishes a teaching, establishes a monastic order, and that teaching sustains itself in the world for a period of time, either shorter or longer. And in the Pali scriptures, in the Pali canon itself, the Buddha lists before him, previous 6 Buddhas, the Buddha Vipassi, 91 eons, 91 kalpas ago, and then Sikhi, Vesavu, they were all in previous eons, previous kalpas. In this particular era, this particular kalpa, then, which is called a fortunate kalpa, or one that is very blessed because of having had so many Buddhas. We have Konagamana, Kakusanda, Kassapa Buddhas, and then Gautama Buddha is the Buddha of the current age. So that speaking of these this kind of mythological framework, when the Buddha is saying that he did not particularly invent these teachings, he is merely the latest in a long line of beings who have rediscovered them, and he talked about it in terms of rediscovering an ancient path, like a path to an ancient city buried in the jungle, and rediscovering the pathway to that. And in other scriptures, after the time of the Buddha himself, later scriptures, they listed the even more Buddhas. So we do a protective chant called the Atanati Aparutta, where it goes back way before the Buddha Vipassi, Tanhankaro, to the 28 Buddhas previously, and a whole lineage from him. And other later scriptures, you have 500 Buddhas, so it's like the longer after the Buddha actually lived, the more Buddhas are talked about. So in his own lifetime, he only talked about 7. A few hundred years later, they talked about 28. A few hundred years after that, they talk about 500. So I think in the general flow of religious conceptual proliferation, then things get sort of more kind of colourful and complicated and detailed as time goes by. But certainly within the Buddha's own lifetime, he spoke of himself as being part of this kind of lineage. So that in terms of the talk today, what I thought would be useful, in respect to most Buddhist teachings and Buddhist stories, you have three different layers or three different levels. You have the mythological layer, you have the historical, and you have the psychological. So you would say the mythological format would be, say, talking about Buddhas of previous ages and 91 kalpas ago. A kalpa is from a big bang to a big crunch. So it's like a whole universe coming into being, reaching its limit, and then collapsing to nothingness, and then another universe arising, expanding, and collapsing. So we would call that the mythological framework. So most Buddhist stories have a mythological framework, and then you have the historical that we know, even if people dispute, well, when exactly was the Buddha born? What exactly did he say? We can be pretty sure that some very exceptional being lived in northeast India, was born in the northeast India, Nepal area, and spent quite a number of years traveling and teaching around that area, and has left a legacy of teachings for many, many people that have lasted to the present day. So there's a historical element, and most of the scholars debate around what is precise in terms of history, and say what exactly the Buddha taught, and where exactly he lived, and where exactly things happened. And then you have the psychological, which is to say, how does the figure of the Buddha and the teachings, how do they map onto our own psychology, our own internal patterns of experience? How does that work? So that I would suggest, and this is a helpful framework to consider, that you have in any Buddhist teaching, and most religious teachings, you have these three layers: the mythological, the historical, and the psychological that interweave and inform each other. So that's what I thought I would present in particular today, and particularly the kind of talking mostly about the mythological side, what a Buddha represents in terms of principles, and then how that maps onto our own experience. So when we talk about the Buddha, what does it mean to be a Buddha? Then we have a series of characteristics that we recite. So that when we have the morning and evening chanting, we recite Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vichya Charana Sampanno Sugato Lokavidu Anuttaro Purisa Dhamma Sarati Sattha Deva Manusanam Buddho Bhagavati. So these are called the 9 qualities of the Buddha. So these are describing the qualities of the Buddha as a spiritual entity, as a kind of mentor, as a spiritual example for us. And that these 9 qualities, the first is Arahang, which there's a few different translations of these, so I had to live liberty and precaution of writing these down. So some places Arahang is translated as the pure one, or the accomplished. Samma Sambuddho means a perfectly enlightened Buddha, one who has arrived at full enlightenment under their own guidance, not through the influence or the kind of teaching structure or practices of another teacher. So perfectly self-enlightened. Vichya Charana Sampanno means impeccable or perfect in conduct and understanding, perfect in knowledge and conduct. Sugato means the sublime one or the accomplished one. Lokavidu means the knower of the world, one who understands how the world works, one who sees the world clearly. Anuttara Purisa Dhamma Sarati. In our chanting books, that's translated as he trains perfectly those who wish to be trained. So the one who is the unexcelled teacher of those who wish to be taught. Sattha Deva Manusanam, teacher of gods and humans. Buddho, one who is awake, enlightened. Bhagava, one who is holy or blessed. So we recite those qualities of the Buddha. So these are the qualities of the Buddha, and we say recite those as an act of reverence, of gratitude, of respect, and to see this being who lived 2,500 years ago was an embodiment of those qualities. So when we ponder the question, what does it mean to be a Buddha? It means a Buddha is a being who embodies those particular qualities. And so there are also other lists of qualities like the 10 powers of the Buddha, which encompass things like knowing what is possible and what is impossible, knowing the nature of all other beings, understanding the characters, the dispositions of all other beings, and also having the particular powers of seeing into past lives, seeing into the karmic streams of other beings, and also being fully liberated. So we talk about these particular qualities of a Buddha. Say a Buddha has these particular characteristics. We also say that according to the mythology, that a Buddha only arises in the world when all memory of the previous Buddha has disappeared. So that all memory of Kassapa Buddha and the teachings of Kassapa Buddha have disappeared from the world, and it's only then that the next Buddha Gautama, has arisen. Also within the lifetime of a Buddha, then there are these sort of certain mythological patterns whereby the town where the Buddha was born, being enlightened under the Bodhi tree, having 2 chief disciples, establishing the Sangha. These are patterns that occur in the lifetimes according to the mythology of every single Buddha, whether it's Vipassi, Sikhi, Vesapu, Konidamma, Kakasanda, Kassapa. That these are patterns that repeat themselves in a mythological form. So then, one of the interesting things then is to consider, we revere this great being, that we are here, sitting in this place. This former school in Hertfordshire is now a place where we gather and we reflect upon the lifestyle established by this great being. We reflect upon the teachings that he left. If you consider 2,500 years ago, it was still the Iron Age here. This was 450 years before the Romans arrived. It's a long time ago. If you're aware of British history, it was still, this is still the prehistoric era. It was out of the Stone Age, but it was the Iron Age. This was a completely different world. Where we are now, in Hertfordshire, this was still just an Iron Age civilization. It was a very, very different world. And here we are, we've gathered together from a person who was teaching in India at that time, 2,500 years ago, and we are living in a way that's guided by that person's insights, embodying the particular teachings that he gave, even wearing the same clothing that he established. That the pattern that our robes are sewn in, this is the longest lasting fashion on the surface of the planet. The Buddha, because in the early days the nuns and monks used to wear robes put together by bits of scraps of cloth, and whatever way the different the sizes of different patches were formed, they would sort of put it all together and make a basically rectangular wrap. And the Buddha one day was walking through the hills, looking with Ananda, looking down over the fields, the rice fields in Magadha, and said, "Ananda, see how the fields are laid out in strips and laid out in squares." So Ananda, it would be good if you could design a robe that's made in that kind of a pattern, like the paddy fields of Magadha. So Venerable Ananda went off and drew up a design, and that's what we still wear. So here we are, 2,500 years later, wearing a fashion design that was put together by Venerable Ananda 2,500 years previously. So we chant these words, Itipiso Bhagava Arahant Samma Sambuddho, and we recollect these qualities as to express our gratitude that these teachings have come down, that they can affect our lives so deeply and directly, so helpfully, that they are a way that we can live and establish our patterns of thinking in the current age that helps us and makes a big difference, even in urban 21st century life. these teachings are still applicable and can be of direct benefit to us. So that's a miraculous thing. But in terms of making those teachings alive and really helping us, for most of us it takes more than revering a great spiritual teacher from 2,500 years ago, that we might look up to that great being as an example and we might express our gratitude. But how does that really change our life? How does that really benefit us in a direct way? So I thought I was pondering this theme, so I thought I would share with you a passage from one of Ajahn Chah's Dhamma teachings that relates particularly to this area, and that I feel is one of the most profound teachings that he ever gave. So probably most of you know this monastery, Amaravati, was established as a branch of Ajahn Chah's monastery. This is a painting of him from the wall here. So he lived from 1918, he was born in June of 1918, and lived until January of 1992, and he established a style of practice and teaching that was as fully in accord with the Buddha's way as he could. And this monastery and about 380 others in Thailand and around the world are established according to the standards that Rinpoche put into place. And one of the reasons I feel that his teaching is so has been so much appreciated and is so widespread is because of the practical applicability of that, the way he spoke, and also he was very respectful of the teaching, and very traditional, very orthodox in many ways, but also he was capable of bringing it alive and helping it to be applicable in a very direct way. So this is from a teaching of his that's entitled Dhamma Nature. In the collected teachings of Ajahn Chah, many of his Dhamma talks are put together in a single volume. So this is from the talk Dhamma Nature. The Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha exist in our minds, but we have to see it clearly. Some people just pick this up casually saying, oh, the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha exist in my mind, yet their own practice is not suitable or appropriate. It is thus not befitting that the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha should be found in their minds, namely because the mind must first be that mind which knows the Dhamma. Bringing everything back to this point of Dhamma, we will come to know that the truth does exist in the world, and thus it is possible for us to practice and realize it. For instance, Nama Dhamma, feelings, thoughts, imagination, etc., is all uncertain. When anger arises, it grows and changes and finally disappears. Happiness too arises, grows and changes, and finally disappears. They are empty. They are not any thing. This is always the way of all things, both mentally and materially. Internally, there are this body and mind. Externally, there are trees, vines, and all manner of things which display this universal law of uncertainty. Whether a tree, a mountain, or an animal, it's all Dhamma. Everything is Dhamma. Where is this Dhamma? Speaking simply, that which is Dhamma doesn't exist. Dhamma is nature. This is called the Satya Dhamma, the true Dhamma. If one sees nature, one sees Dhamma. If one sees Dhamma, one sees nature. Seeing nature, one knows the Dhamma. And so, what is the use of a lot of study when the ultimate reality of life, in its every moment, in its every act, is just an endless cycle of births and deaths? If we are mindful and clearly aware when in all postures, sitting, standing, walking, lying, then self-knowledge is ready to be born. That is, knowing the truth of Dhamma already in existence, right here and now. At present, the Buddha, the real Buddha, is still living. For he is the Dhamma itself, the Satya Dhamma. And Satya Dhamma, that which enables one to become Buddha, still exists. It hasn't fled anywhere. It gives rise to two Buddhas, one in body and the other in mind. The real Dhamma, the Buddha told Ananda, can only be realized through practice. Whoever sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma. And how is this? Previously, no Buddha existed. It was only when Siddhartha Gautama realized the Dhamma that he became the Buddha. If we explain it in this way, then he is the same as us. If we realize the Dhamma, then we will likewise be the Buddha. This is called the Buddha in mind, or Nama Dhamma. We must be mindful of everything we do, for we become the inheritors of our own good or evil actions. In doing good, we reap good. In doing evil, we reap evil. All you have to do is look into your everyday lives to know this is so. Siddhartha Gautama was enlightened to the realization of this truth, and this gave rise to the appearance of a Buddha in the world. Likewise, if each and every person practices to attain this truth, then they too will change to be Buddha. Thus, the Buddha still exists. Some people are very happy saying, oh, if the Buddha still exists, then I can practice Dhamma. That is how you should see it. The Dhamma that the Buddha realized is the Dhamma which exists permanently in the world. It can be compared to groundwater, which permanently exists in the ground. When a person wishes to dig a well, he must dig down deep enough to reach the groundwater. The groundwater is already there. He doesn't create the water, he just discovers it. Similarly, the Buddha didn't invent the Dhamma. He didn't decree the Dhamma, he merely revealed what was already there. Through contemplation, the Buddha saw the Dhamma. Therefore, it is said that the Buddha was enlightened, for enlightenment is knowing the Dhamma. The Dhamma is the truth of this world. Seeing this, Siddhartha Gautama is called the Buddha. The Dhamma is that which allows other people to become a Buddha, one who knows Dhamma. If beings have good conduct and are loyal to the Buddha Dhamma, then those beings will never be short of virtue and goodness. With understanding, we shall see that we are really not far from the Buddha, but sitting face to face with him. When we understand the Dhamma, then at that moment we will see the Buddha. If one really practices, one will hear the Buddha Dhamma, whether sitting at the root of a tree, lying down, or in whatever posture. This is not something to merely think about, it arises from the pure mind. Just remembering these words is not enough, because this depends upon seeing the Dhamma itself, nothing other than this. Thus we must be determined to practice to be able to see this, and then our practice will really be complete. Wherever we sit, stand, walk or lie down, we will hear the Buddha's Dhamma. In order to practice his teaching, the Buddha taught us to live in a quiet place so that we can learn to collect and restrain the senses of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. This is the foundation for our practice, since these are the only places where all things arise. Thus we collect and restrain these six senses in order to know the conditions that arise there. All good and evil arise through these six senses. They are the predominant faculties in the body. The eye is predominant in seeing, the ear in hearing, the nose in smelling, the tongue in tasting, the body in contacting hold, hot and cold, hard and soft, and the mind in the arising of mental impressions. All that remains for us to do is to build our practice around these points. So I'm also aware that Luang Por Chah told us never to prepare Dhamma talks. But, not wishing intending any disrespect to my revered teacher, I felt that this is an incredibly useful principles that he's put forth in that teaching, and so it's helpful to contemplate that, because it's a way that he would often speak, that we can revere the Buddha who lived 2,500 years ago and be grateful for his teaching, but the Buddha as a refuge, the Buddha as one of the aspects of the Triple Gem, then we have to consider a refuge is a safe place. A memory or an imagined holy being of 2,500 years ago is not a safe place, it's not a genuine refuge. But what makes the Buddha a refuge? When we say Buddhaṃ Saranam Gacchāmi, the words are not the refuge. The idea of the Buddha who lived all those years ago is not a refuge. It doesn't protect us. So what Luang Por Chah is talking about here is the Buddha which is the real refuge, the Buddha which is essentially the psychological aspect, the Buddha which is the aware aspect of our own minds. And as he says, when you see the Dhamma, you see the Buddha. When you see the Buddha, you see the Dhamma. And saying everything is part of nature. So what aspect of your body or mind is not part of nature? Anybody come up with anything? Everything, mental, physical, spiritual, that we call ourselves or call the world around us, every single part of it is an aspect of nature. Even the microphone and the plastic that the cable is wrapped in, these all came from minerals in the ground or petrochemicals in the ground that are woven together and formed according to the laws of nature. The electricity that powers the microphone and that is recording all this these are all aspects of nature. So that in Ajahn Chah's statements here, when he says at present the Buddha, the real Buddha, is living, for he is the Dhamma itself, the Satya Dhamma. The real Dhamma can only be realized through practice. So that Dhamma is nature, and that every aspect of our being is nature, is that Dhamma. And one of the teachings that he quotes here, and was used very, very often in his teachings, he would say, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha, one who sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma. And that comes from an exchange between the Buddha and a monk called Vakali, who was on his deathbed. And he was regretting the fact that he was too ill to go and pay his respects to the Buddha. So the Buddha heard about this and went to go and visit him in his kuti on the slopes of Isigiri, I think near Rajagaha. And when the Buddha arrived at his kuti, then Vakali tried to get up and bow down before the Buddha, and the Buddha said, Vakali, yes, be at ease, sit, lie down, don't bother yourself. Why are you struggling to get up? And he said, well, I want to pay respects to you. And he said, well, why do you want to revere this filthy body, this kind of this collection of 32 parts? This is that if you see the Dhamma, you see me. If you see me, you see the Dhamma. And that exchange between him and Vakali, if you can follow that, so that the Buddha said, if you see me, you see the Dhamma. If you revere the Dhamma, you revere me. You don't have to be climbing off your bed and bowing down. That's just an external gesture. But if you really see the Dhamma, then you're seeing me already. You don't have to just make a special effort just because I've walked into your hut, into your kuti. Similarly, which also Ajahn Chah is referring to in this teaching, there's another sutta in the Itivuttaka called the hem of the robe, and the Buddha says, if a monk took hold of the edge of my robe, but his heart was filled with greed, hatred and delusion, it would be as if he was living far away from me, many hundreds of leagues away, hundreds of miles away. Even if he's hanging on to the edge of my robe and following me around, it would be as if he is far from the Tathagata. And comparably, if someone is living the other side of the Himalayas, they're physically many, many leagues away, but the heart is free of greed, hatred and delusion, then it's as if they are sitting face to face with him. It's as if they are face to face with the Buddha, even though physically they're far away. So when we reflect upon this question, what does it mean to be a Buddha, then in a way it's not just talking about a mythological form or kind of a historical figure, but rather the quality. What does it mean to be awake? What does it mean to embody that quality within our own hearts, within our own minds? Because this is which I would always point to. He said the Buddha that's a refuge is the Buddha that's alive here and now, and that the Buddha that's alive, that is accessible here and now, is the awareness of your own mind, the capacity that your mind has to be awake. That's the refuge. That's the safe place. So, like right now, so I'm just getting over a cold, and a bit kind of sort of sneezy, clogged up, feverish, kind of yucky. Yesterday I was laid out flat for most of the day. Fortunately, I'm a little bit more energetic today. So, if the mind takes refuge in the body and identifies with the body, then it goes, oh, I'm sick, I'm unwell, and I really want this to be over. This is really inconvenient, I've got to give the Sunday talk tomorrow. Am I going to be well in time? And the mind can get annoyed or worried or upset. But if there's awareness, then we recognize, well, I can be aware of this feeling of sneezing a lot and having a clogged up head, being sleepy and feverish. The mind can be fully aware of that and not make anything out of it. So, okay, well, it's only Saturday, I've got, the other monks have taken care of the Asala Puja ceremonies yesterday evening, that was, and so I don't have to think about it. I can leave that alone. And if I'm well by tomorrow, great. If I'm not well tomorrow, well, something else will happen. Somebody else will look after the Sunday events if I'm not able to. And so that in that moment, there can be a full awareness of the body being ill or kind of unable to do much. And if the mind is not identified with that, it's a refuge, it's a safe place. As soon as the mind is identified with the body and the personality, with my gains and losses, comfort, discomfort, success and failure, then there's where we're not the knower of the world, that the heart has been born into the world, we've become attached to the world. So the psychological aspect of being a Buddha is in a way the most important, and this is what Lupa Cha would emphasize, that the Buddha is alive. He's not just a historical figure to revere and to sort of pray to sort of help you get through your exams, or before you go into the operation, Buddha, please help me. I'm going under the knife. Please be kind. Like that's talking to an invisible deity is not really the right way to understand Buddha, I would suggest. But rather the Buddha that is the refuge is that, I can be aware as they put the anesthetic into me, I can be aware as they wheel me into the operating theatre. I had an interesting story when I was in Thailand about Lumpur Klian, who's a very highly revered meditation master. He lives in the north of Thailand, near Chiang Mai. I was just in Thailand in June, and some of the monks I met had just been to go and see him. He's very ill right now, and probably close to the end of his life, according to what these monks had to say. And they were recounting the story of Lumpur Klian a number of years ago. He's very highly regarded as a meditation teacher, and many years ago he had this abscess in his leg, like an infection that just wouldn't heal up, and so the medical advice was, you need to go and have an operation and kind of cut out all of the infected tissue and patch it all up, and then let the leg recover with all of the infected tissue cut away. So he finally agreed to that because the thing was not healing up on its own. And then when he went to the hospital, he said, "I'd like you to do the operation without any anaesthetic. I'm interested to investigate the feelings." And I thought that would get your attention. Probably a few medical people gathered here. And so the doctors said, no way, we can't possibly do that. And he said, "Please, I want you, I'm a patient, please do it for me. And you call yourselves my students, and you respect me, so please, I'm asking you." So apparently they went back and forth a little bit on this. And then finally the doctor said, "Okay, well, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to put this tray of instruments. We'll do it without the anaesthetic, but I'm going to put this tray of instruments on the top of your legs. And as soon as there's any movement in the instrument tray, as soon as we hear a sound of anything even rattling, then we're going to give you the anaesthetic straight away." So apparently he got through the operation without twitching. And it was a kind of big abscess, sort of fist-sized chunk they had to sort of carve out of his leg. And it was so nasty that when they released him from the hospital with a dressing on it, when he went back to his monastery, he asked to give instructions to his attendant monks how to change the dressing. Yet 2 of his attendants fainted when they saw the hole in his leg. So he ended up having to change the dressing himself because his upatats, his attendants, couldn't cope with this kind of great gaping wound in the Ajahns leg. But he was apparently fine with it. So I acknowledge this is a bit of an extreme example, but that which also shows how the mind can take refuge in awareness, that there is a full attention, but a non-attachment, non-identification, even with intense feeling of that kind of scale, that kind of nature. And the Buddha himself, in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, he makes the comment at the beginning of this teaching, in the Digha Nikaya, it's about the end of his life. He says, you know, I'm 80 years old, and my body is like an old cart that's held together with strings and straps and wires. It's impossible for me to experience any kind of comfort. He said, if I'm paying attention to the body, then I'm in constant pain. So the only way I can experience any kind of comfort is to completely absorb my mind into emptiness. Yeah, if he's paying attention to the senses, then the predominant experience was one of pain. So even the Buddha had chronic pain. He didn't complain about it, didn't make a problem out of it, but he just casually mentions, you know, that's what he's experiencing whenever he's just paying attention to the body and the senses in the ordinary way. So this establishment of awareness, this is, as was described there a little bit in the talk by Ajahn Chah, you know, this is a refuge that is available to us all the time. And insight meditation, vipassana, is essentially built around the establishment of that quality of awareness and the development of that as a refuge. So right now we can say, oh, we're sitting in the sala here at Amaravati, and it's a Sunday afternoon Dhamma Talk. It's fairly sort of benign, non-threatening, I presume fairly pain-free for most people. Maybe some of you got chronic pain, but if so, then it's a better example. So we can, in this moment, we can say, well, we're sitting in the sala here at Amaravati. But actually, if you look at it in terms of insight, there's awareness of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch arising and passing away. We close our eyes, the visual world disappears. Open the eyes, the visual world reappears. If I stop speaking, auditory consciousness switches off. If I start speaking, then the mind goes into picking up sound again. So that we are putting together our impression of the world moment by moment in this field of experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. As Ajahn Chah said at the very end of that talk, all good and evil arise through these six senses. This is where our practice is to be focused, because that's where experience is located. So that when we train the mind to be aware, to know, oh, this is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. This is the world coming into being. This is being formed in this field of awareness right now. At that moment, there's the awareness, there's the quality of knowing, and there's the objects of awareness. There's if you like, there's a separation, a transcending. The mind is still aware of the world, but it's not entangled with the world. It's still, fully participating in the world, and the words are flowing out of my mouth, and my mind is choosing what words to say next. There's an engagement with the world, but at the same time, there's a non-entanglement. So that this, the Buddha that is the refuge, is that very quality of awareness. Now, as he said, as Ajahn Chah pointed out, if we say, oh, the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, they're aspects of my mind. I am Buddha. Oh, wow, that means I'm already enlightened. Hey, great. I can claim to be enlightened if the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha are already just aspects of my mind. But what he points out is that the mind actually has to be fully in tune with reality. Otherwise, it's just an idea. I've spent a lot of years in California with this kind of the idea of being Buddha, or just all you've got to do is be aware, and just do whatever you feel like. As long as you're aware of it, then you're being Buddha. So that's a way to get into serious trouble. Because you have the idea, it's like having a kind of plastic policeman's badge. Yeah, it looks like a police officer's badge, but you kind of stick it on your jacket, but it doesn't mean that you're a police officer. You got the badge, but it doesn't mean to say that you're qualified. So in the same way, the idea of, oh, the awareness of my mind is Buddha, hey, that's great. Doesn't mean to say that your heart is totally free of greed, hatred, and delusion at all times. be much easier. It would be much easier if it was so simple. But the practice is a clarification, a purification, and a freeing of the heart of greed, hatred, and delusion, so that that innate quality of awareness, the capacity of the mind to know, is undistorted, is unbiased by personal preferences, by fears, by desires, by aversions, and our personal conditioning. Simple ways to approach this also, that Luang Por Sumedho would often emphasize this theme, this area, as a centerpiece of practice. And many years ago, back when the only monastery that we had in this country was Chidhurst, before any of the branches started up in Northumberland or in the West Country or any place, that in the very early days of Chidhurst, Ajahn Sumedho used to often ask the question, what is it that Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know? What is it that Buddhas know? And you think, wow, the 10 powers of the Buddha he knows all of the karmic streams of every being around him, he's fully aware of all the different planes of existence, he can see back into the past, back into the time of Vipassi Buddha, or way back to Ankara Buddha, and the Buddha has this kind of cosmic vision and understanding of all things. So that's what the mind might imagine in here. But it was a deliberately kind of leading question. What is it that Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know? And then he would pause for a moment and he'd say, what Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know is that all that arises passes away and is not so. Oh, so it's kind of deliberately disappointing. Yeah, is that all? But that is the essential thing, that the Buddha, what is it that Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know, is that everything is changing. And like exactly as Luang Por Chah puts it here, that what the Buddhas know is that everything is uncertain, every perception is changing, everything is in a state of flux, and the mind does not know what's going to happen next. It's uncertain. It can't create certainty out of what is intrinsically uncertain. So that another of Ajahn Chah's statements in a different Dhamma Talk, he actually says this. He says, the Buddha is uncertainty. Again, they think, what? The Buddha is uncertainty. You think, well, that's a weird thing to say. But he said, the Buddha is uncertainty because the truth of Dhamma is that all things are uncertain. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All things, sabbe sankhara anicca, are uncertain, are transient. He said, that is the truth of the way things are in respect to all experiential reality. And if one sees the Buddha, one sees the Dhamma, one sees the Dhamma, one sees the Buddha, if the Dhamma is the truth that all things are uncertain, then the Buddha is that truth of uncertainty as well. So you would make this kind of statement. The Buddha is uncertainty. One who sees, the mind that truly sees that everything is uncertain, is the Buddha mind. Now, you might be, on one hand, you might kind of be prone to inflation, saying, I'm the Buddha, I am pure awareness, that's what I am, at one end of the scale. The other end of the scale, like me, oh no, I'm just this kind of ordinary wretched person with petty thoughts and all kinds of anxieties and irritations and opinions that I won't let go of, and I'm attached to my possessions and my house and my dog, and we underrate ourselves. But these, either overrating yourself or underrating yourself, are both aspects of the mind, say, drifting wide of the middle, being out of balance. But when the mind is awake to the middle way, then, and when there is the maximum quality of clarity, then there, without overestimating yourself or underestimating yourself, just recognizing, well, whether I like it or not, or whatever I make of it, the mind has this quality of awareness. And that awareness is not really a person. It knows success, it knows failure, it knows praise, it knows criticism, it knows gain, it knows loss. It's just this. It's simply this. And whatever it knows is intrinsically in a state of change. So that simple reflection of Luang Por Sumedho's, what is it that Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know? All that arises passes away and is not so. So on the surface level it seems like a very simple statement, almost bland, like, oh, is that all? I can remember that. But to really know it, moment by moment, knowing this feeling of the delight of success, the sweetness of success, of getting what you like, yes. The bitterness of losing what you like, or being criticized, or feeling loss or pain. To know, oh, this arises and passes away and it's not so. How could it be me and mine? So when the mind truly knows that and is fully aware of it, but I'm unentangled in it, that is the awake mind, the Buddha mind. There's another exchange that is very, very significant in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha met a Brahmin called Dona. And the story goes, it's in the sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. Dona was walking on the road and he saw the footprints in the dust of the Buddha, and he thought, wow, what kind of a person left these footprints? These marks left in the footprints are so strange. These perfectly round marks like a wheel with perfect spokes. Who's got feet like this? This is amazing, and very symmetrical and strange in terms of the imprint of the feet made in the dust. So Dona kind of followed these footprints, and then they saw that they led off the road and into the forest. So he followed the footprints, and then he saw the Buddha sitting under the tree. The Buddha was meditating, and Dona was extremely impressed. Wow, what kind of a being is this? He was very, very tall, very serene, very radiant, sitting under the tree meditating. And so the Brahmin Dona kind of went up and kneeled down, and after a time, then the Buddha opened his eyes, and Dona spoke to him and said, "Excuse me, are you a deva?" And he said, "No, I'm not a deva." Are you a Brahma god? He said, "No, I'm not a Brahma." "Are you a yaka, a celestial demon?" And "No, I'm not a celestial demon." "Are you a tree spirit?" No. Are you a person?" "No, I'm not a person." So, well, what are you? And so in that, he does, are you a human being? Are you a person? And the Buddha says, no. So the Buddha can't lie. He's incapable of lying. So then Dona asks him, are you a human being? Are you a person? And he said, no. So that's interesting. So then the Buddha makes this comment, said, that whereby the Tathagata could be identified as being a Brahma, or as a Deva, or as a Yaka, or as a Manusa, as a human being, has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, completely abandoned and rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata has abandoned any form of identification, any kind of attachment, whereby he could be described by any of these forms. So then Dona says, so, well, what are you then? And the Buddha says, you can know me as one who is awake. Buddho Asmi. Buddho Asmi. And that's probably the place where we get the word Buddha from, that very exchange. In front of the sort of key. I mean, it's a unique little dialogue in the canon, but and the term Buddho is used in the 9 qualities of the Buddha, but it's a significant statement when the Buddha's asked, what are you? Buddho Asmi, that I am awake, or you can know me as one who is awake, or wakefulness. Now, another of the reflections that Luang Por Sumedho would give that relates to this area that I think is very, very helpful is in terms of how we relate to our mind, our personality, our life. And say, for example, you have a habit of being irritated, that your mind, that you are complaining. It's, such a problem with complaining. I'm so critical. I'm always annoyed with people. I'm complaining and criticizing people. Or maybe you're very lustful. You kind of keep falling in love with people, being obsessed by people. Or maybe you're afraid. You're a worrier. I've got a real worry problem. I feel just so anxious and fearful all the time. Or maybe you're very jealous and you have a repeated issues with jealousy, being jealous of other people. I'm not, by the way, I always say I'm not reading anybody's mind. So you're thinking, how did we know? How did we know? It's just statistics. I always say this. It's not psychic powers. It's just statistics. That's how we are as human beings. Some of us are going to be jealous types. Some of us are going to be lustful types. Some of us are going to be complainers. Some of us are going to be warriors. That's how we tend to be. So we might think, I've got a jealousy problem, I've got a lust problem, I've got a fear problem. And then be very sincere and diligent in trying to work on my problem and thinking I'm being realistic, I'm trying to do what's necessary. And what Lord Posomeda would often point out is that, in our very effort to work with these particular difficulties, we actually strengthen them, we reify them, we make them real. This is because of saying, me and my problem. I've got this fear problem, I've got this jealousy problem, I've got this anger problem. And so that unconsciously, unwittingly, we are making there a real substantial I, who is the genuine owner of this substantial thing. There's me who has this problem. And the mind creates this idea, if there was me without the problem, me without the jealousy problem, me without the anger problem, me without the fear problem, wouldn't that be great? Seems reasonable enough. And many of the texts that we read seem to describe that, encourage that. But what he would point out is that in the very way the mind frames it, it reifies the difficulty. And the more it's me and my problem, no matter how hard we try to work, the more it seems to strengthen it and make it impossible to work with. So he would suggest what he would call a paradigm shift, changing the paradigm from me and my problem to the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, or the awake mind seeing the way things are. And so that, again, it might sound a little bit inflated or sort of hyperbolic, say the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, I'm just this person with an anger problem. But Buddha in this respect, meaning Buddha with a small b, the awake mind, as the Ajahn Chah says, the Buddha in mind, the awake mind that knows the feeling of complaining, or feeling of lust, or the feeling of fear, the feeling of jealousy. Now, even though we might say, I'm jealous all the time, I'm always lustful, I'm always angry, what Luang Por Sumedho would point out is that we tell ourselves that, but it's really not true. If you look, yeah, maybe it's a repetitive pattern, but it's not there all the time. And that even if you see it as like a strong habit, in nobody's experience does it really exist all the time. It arises and passes away. In fact, one of Ajahn Chah's meditations on anger, this is an interesting practice, just as an aside. He said, if rather than trying to practice loving kindness to get rid of anger, practice anger. Think an angry thought and sustain it for an hour. And as soon as your mind stops feeling angry, let go of the non-angry thought and re-establish the anger. And you try and do that, and it's virtually impossible. I tried it a couple of times. And to try and stay angry for an hour is really hard work. By the time you get to the end of the hour, it's like, thank goodness that's over. So you might try that as an extra practice. But going back to the Buddha seeing the Dhamma. So then what this is doing is they're saying, yeah, well, there's, rather than I've got a fear problem, which is the word I found I was most intensely working with in those days. This was back in the mid-80s, late 80s, when the Luang Por Sumedho was teaching here at Amaravati. Would be say, yeah, it's true actually. Amazingly enough, the teacher is correct. I say I'm always worried, I'm always afraid, but it's not true. There's times when I forget that altogether. I'm brushing my teeth or on my way somewhere, and then suddenly I realise, I've forgotten to be worried. And you realize, that's right, it does. It arises and passes away. And that suggestion of changing the paradigm, going from me and my problem to here's the awake mind seeing this feeling arising and passing away. It was not like some kind of special mind filter being overlaid on top, but rather it was peeling away the filters of presumption and supposition and habit and seeing what was already really there. That actually, yeah, it's not like something I'm adding to it. It's really, when you peel away the layers of habit and delusion, here is the aware mind seeing this pattern of feeling arising and passing away. Oh, that's what's always been happening. So that there's always just been this quality of awareness, knowing fear or jealousy or desire or aversion, whatever it might be, arising and passing away. And when that paradigm is shifted, and that there's a quality of the letting go of the personalizing habit, the letting go of the I and me and mine, and seeing it in terms of, here's the awake mind, the Buddha mind, seeing the way things are, there's a spaciousness, there's a naturalness. So even though what's being experienced might be quite unwholesome or painful, there's a spaciousness around it. There's not that kind of stress of identification. It's seeing, oh, well, fear arises and passes away. There's a body, there's a mind. Fear is going to happen. Aversion is going to happen. Jealousy is going to happen. So it doesn't have to be seen as a problem. It doesn't have to be seen as me and mine. So this I found was a tremendously helpful and practical teaching. So when we reflect on this theme, what does it mean to be a Buddha? It doesn't have to be some sort of theoretical idea, or just talking about an idealized mythological being, but to be a Buddha, maybe with a small b, to be a Buddha is to be that awareness that is able to know the arising and passing of all things, and in that being Buddha, then there's a tremendous freedom. Maybe one of the last thing to share, and before we have break for our tea and stretch our legs and such like. When we consider that quality of awareness, then we see how the mind tries to turn that into an object or make it into something. But just like the Buddha said to Dhamma, that whereby the Tathagata might be identified as a deva, or as a yaka, or as a brahma, or as a person, has been abandoned by the Tathagata. There's a similar exchange that the Buddha has with Vacchagotta. When Vacchagotta's been, as a wanderer, has been asking the Buddha about what happens to an enlightened being after the passing away of the body, then the Buddha speaks about his own internal experience in a very and his own way of relating to the body and the experiential reality. He said, and talking about his own experience, so he said, Vaccha, that material form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, whereby one trying to describe the Tathagata might describe him, that has been cut off at the roots, made like a palm tree stump, has been completely relinquished and rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. The Tathagata, you can't reckon it, you can't form it. You say, well, what is that awareness? Is it male, female, tall, short? Does it have a nationality? The Tathagata, you can say that awareness of your own heart is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations or consciousness. The Tathagata is profound, boundless, immeasurable, like the great ocean. So to take as a final reflection, then you said that you can hear in this teaching that the Tathagata is that aware, awake quality. It has a substantial reality, but you can't describe that in terms of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or any of our normal reference points. So the Buddha just says it's immeasurable, unfathomable, boundless, like the great ocean, which is very frustrating to the thinking mind. But I want to have a definition. But it's frustrating to the thinking mind But if you notice, it's also liberating to the heart, that this heart, this aware, awake quality, can't be defined, can't be determined or formed in terms of our normal language and thinking, in terms of our normal imagination. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this afternoon. So we can have a break now, quarter of an hour or so, and I suspect the tea makers will be busy, and the doors are opening, yes, and we can reconvene about 20 past for the questions and answers and Dhamma discussion. Please do feel free to ask any questions that would be say, useful to explore in terms of what I was talking about. There's a wandering mic, so I would ask people to wait until the microphone arrives so that your voice can be heard by everybody, and we can also record the questions so that it helps things for future reference and understanding. Sometimes you get a long answer that people can't figure out what the question was. So please do patiently wait for the microphone to arrive. So if there's things that would be useful for me to talk about further from the talk that I gave, then please ask away freely.
I'm loud enough anyway.
Yes, yeah.
I'm loud enough.
But we can't record it without the microphone.
Alright, thank you. Okay, everything arises, passes by, and I am not a self. So what does it mean by I am not a self, please?
Well, the Buddha used this, say, the teaching on anatta as a way of looking at the mind's habits of identification. So usually we say, I'm a person, I'm a man, I'm English, I'm Indian, I'm Sri Lankan, I'm Thai, I'm 60 years old, I'm 30 years old, I'm 40 years old. We make these everyday designations and identify with our body, our personality, our nationality, our mood. I'm happy, I'm unhappy, I'm sick, I'm well. And this is a very matter-of-fact kind of identification. So the Buddha's teaching on anatta is a tool that can be used to help explore that and to see whether it's true or not. So that there's nowhere in the Pali Canon where the Buddha can be found to say there is no self, which is interesting. He never says there is no self, but rather what the teachings on anatta are pointing to is that the usual things that we consider to be who and what we are, our body, our personality, our life story, our moods, our opinions, when you look to find an owner, you can't find what that owner is, or where it is. That feeling of I-ness, me-ness and my-ness. So it's a way of, in a sense, breaking the illusions of habit that we have. And so it's an analytical method. So when you say, well, I'm the body, well, okay, what's the I that is the experiencer of the body or the owner of the body? What does that I look like? Where is it? Can you find it? And so that process is, say, what insight meditation is designed to clarify and to strengthen, that way of recognizing with the habits of I am a body, I'm a personality, I am a man, I'm a woman, I'm old, I'm young, and to see that those can only be relative truths. And that, a simple way of relating to it, Ajahn Amaro would hold up something like this and say, is this short or is it long? If you're an ant, it's really long. If you're an elephant, it's really short. So is it short or long? The shortness or longness is added by the mind. It is what it is. It's the configuration of the four elements, but it's called short or long, or mine or yours, or whatever, is what the mind adds to it. So the process of insight meditation, and so the clarification of that quality of awareness is where it's illuminating the habits of identification, illuminating them, seeing what they're based on, and training the mind to let go. When you look for the real self, well, what am I really? Then that's why I find that last teaching I referred to, the dialogue between the Buddha and Vajragota, that when the Buddha's talking about, in a way, his own subjective experience, like trying to describe the Tathagata, so that you can't, there's nothing you can describe it by. But yeah, it's profound, boundless, immeasurable, unfathomable. There's an isness, it's a quality, but you can't use our ordinary thinking, our language or concepts to describe what that quality is, other than that it knows. It's awake. It's aware. So if you remember that dialogue is where the Buddha says that material form, feeling, perception, mental formations of consciousness, or consciousness, whereby one trying to describe the Tathagata might describe him, has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions for existence, and rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations. Consciousness is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So again, to the thinking mind is sort of, but what am I? What is this thing that's aware? What is it? And in that statement, the Buddha is saying, in a sense, that quality of knowing is the most real thing there is, but it's not really a thing in the way that we use the word normally. There's no language that can be used to describe it, no concept. There's another dialogue between the Buddha and a young Brahmin student called Upasiva, where Upasiva is asking about what happens to an enlightened being at the death of the body. And the Buddha says, one who has reached the end has no criterion by which they can be measured. That which could be spoken of is no more. You cannot say they do not exist, but when all modes of being, all phenomena have been removed, all means of description have gone too. One who has reached the end has no criterion by which they can be measured. That which could be spoken of is no more. So that, again, to the conceptualizing thinking mind, it's like, but. That's the way the mind frames the world, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, language. But that's all based on time, space, three-dimensional space, individual existence. And the Buddha is saying the reality is beyond all of those habitual measurements and concepts. So don't try to conceive it. So it's frustrating to the thinking mind, but liberating to the heart, I would suggest. Please, any other questions? There's no doubts in the room? Yes?
Is it the Tathagata then that is reincarnated? And if it isn't, then what is? And also what happens to the Tathagata after the body fades away?
One who has reached the end has no criterion by which they can be measured. So that the Buddha was absolutely stoic in, say, to respond to your second question first, that there's nothing that can be said. There's a couple of comments where he says something like, such a one has passed beyond the range of knowledge of gods and humans. And or one, they have attained unutterable bliss. Those are the only two comments in the whole of the Pali Canon that the Buddha makes with regards to the experience of what was once a living being in the realm of time and existence after as an enlightened being after the death of the body, which is not a lot to hang things on. But I feel it's rather than trying to create a concept, unutterable bliss, that sounds good. Oh, that's over that. You kind of take you borrow from your everyday experience something that's blissful or delightful, that perfect cup of tea, oh yes, But it's not like the perfect cup of tea, a millionfold, it's a whole different order. So that I feel it's more, and it used to frustrate me a lot in the early days. I thought, but you must have said something. After all this effort to be enlightened, and then where do you go when it's all over? Well, wrong question. And it's amazing the number of times he's asked that question, and he's absolutely reliably non-cooperative. He won't be drawn on it, because he's saying one who has reached the end has no criteria by which they can be measured. Like, if you're letting go of time, location, like where does that being go? Like awareness doesn't apply, being doesn't apply. The future, the past, the present doesn't apply. If the mind is liberated from time, identity and location, there's nothing to hang anything. Our concepts are built out of time, space, individuality, personal experience. So the Buddha was, because most spiritual traditions will come up with some kind of metaphysical description, and where what happens to the holy ones, they get some kind of exalted super duper heaven. But he just, amazingly enough, he saw right from the beginning, there's nothing you can say. So therefore it's better to say nothing. And then he stuck to that through his whole 45-year teaching career. So in terms of what is reborn, it's simple. I'm not very good at short answers. But the short answer is, what gets reborn is habits. Good habits, bad habits, neutral habits. And that whatever the mind is irritated by, whatever it is it loves, whatever it hates, whatever is familiar to it, that's the direction it will be drawn. Whatever is the mind doesn't have a sense of say detachment from, non-identification with. It takes it as real, that really bad thing, or that really good thing, or that really familiar thing. That's the way the attention will be drawn. And it also, one of Ajahn Chah's very common teachings, and similarly Gompo Sameto, would be rather than thinking about rebirth across lifetimes, it's also from one day to the next, or one moment to the next. The things that irritated you yesterday are likely to irritate you tomorrow. Or even if they don't irritate you tomorrow, at least you'll remember, that used to really annoy me. That has an effect, there's a resonance there. So the process of rebirth doesn't have to be very mysterious. The things that you love, the things that you hate, like, I don't know, where do you come from? Where were you born?
Ireland, Galway.
So I would suspect, if you hear an Irish accent here in Amaravati, your attention, there's another Irish voice, where's she from? And so the ear picks up the sound, and that one person, amongst all these people here, 50, 80 people gathered here, who's that? Because of your karma of having been born in Ireland, and that's your language, it's your people. So that familiarity, someone who's got a Scottish accent won't have the same effect. Someone with a French accent will have the same effect. So that's rebirth right there. That's how it works. And so it doesn't have to be mysterious to us. The quality of awareness, the more that it is identified with particular likes, dislikes and familiarities, then that feeds the rebirth process. When the mind clearly sees the nature of all perceptions as they are and doesn't identify, is not entangled with any particular perception or thought or concept. It can know them as they are, simply as arising and passing away and not self. Then that mind is not born. It doesn't identify with that. It's not sort of sucked in the same way. So that it's in a way, it's not that we are being reborn and it is stopping, but rather we appear to be being reborn and the appearance is stopping. Does that make sense? So any other questions, thoughts, reflections? These afternoons are for you, not for me, so please don't be shy.
We just talked about the mind filled with defilement, great anger, delusion, and we're supposed to be aware of it. My question is, when you find your awareness that your mind is intoxicated by one of those three, and in the process, it can take a long time, it can take 1 second before it goes away, or it can linger for days. What is your suggestion we deal with that when we found our mind is intoxicated by one of those?
Good question. Well, it's very interesting when the majority of Lumpur Sumedho's teachings, I would say, my experience, are around the third foundation of mindfulness, the mindfulness of mind states, Cittanupassana. And so I haven't done the statistics on it exactly, but roughly speaking, that he would teach about that area a lot. And particularly the quality of being mindful of our wholesome mind states and unwholesome mind states, and not discriminating between them. If you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the third section, Cittanupassana, is really very short. But one of the interesting things, and that comes through Lumpur Sumedho's teachings over and over again, it's the simplicity and directness of it. Because it says, knowing the agitated mind is agitated, the unagitated mind is unagitated. Knowing the mind filled with anger is filled with anger, the mind free of anger is free of anger. The mind filled with lust is being filled with lust, the mind free of lust is being free of lust. The mind filled with delusion is being filled with delusion, the mind free of delusion is free of delusion. There's no value judgment in the whole thing. They have these, I think it's 16 pairs of qualities, if I remember correctly. And there's no value judgment. It never says freedom from anger is better than anger, or that freedom from agitation is better than being agitated. In that particular instance, and in terms of the establishment of mindfulness, there's no value judgment. It's just the degree of mindfulness to know this is present, and that is the curative treatment. That's the factor that helps the mind to break free of that quality and to not be overwhelmed by it. So that the very fact that there can be the awareness, well, I've been really angry for 3 days. That which knows the anger is not angry. That which knows the agitation is not agitated.
But the pain is still there. But during those process, the pain is still there, the burning is still there. So when we go through that process, what is the advice you would give us? Just go through with it?
Well, patience is the most, as the Buddha said, it's kanti paramang tapo titika ibanam paramang vadanti buddha. Patient endurance is the supreme practice. Seriously, because, and that's in a sense almost like the sort of national anthem of the forest tradition, is patient endurance. Because it's that the pain is still there. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to give up anger today, and off it goes. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. From now on, no more lust. Okay, from today on, no more jealousy. The one sending out the command is not the one receiving the transmission. So the intention can be there, but the kind of karmic momentum behind those habits of anger or stress or whatever it might be, that is driven by a whole different system, if you like. It's like it's got a whole weight of habit and attachment identification behind it. So as it's being known, then the painfulness of it, like, oh, mine is so, so stressful, such a burden, so heavy, being so annoyed all the time. And that just feeling that, knowing that the results of that mind state, being patient with it, letting the results be felt, and not trying to get rid of it, not waiting for it all to be over, but that open-hearted surrender, okay, here it is, this is what it feels like. The more that the mind can be fully open in that way, then you are receiving the effects of past causes. What's being caused, I said the habits of anger or jealousy or fear or whatever, you can't undo those causes. They've already been caused. It's like, you can't, it's happened in the past, you can't change it. So, in the present moment, opening the heart to say, this is the results of that habit. Ow. 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 You can't undo the cause, but you can affect the way that it's received in the present. The more that there's an open-hearted acceptance of the effects of those past causes, that open-heartedness creates causes in the present for peacefulness and clarity in the future. So it's a kind of two-part process, in a way. So you can't undo what's already been done, but that's out of our control. It's like in the 10 qualities of the Buddha, the first quality of the 10 powers of the Buddha, the Dasabala, is knowing what's possible and knowing what's impossible. So you can't uncause something that's already been caused. So what is possible though, is to change the attitude towards that. And in that, then it's really essential to recognize we can experience pain without creating suffering out of it. That the dukkha is one thing, the painful feeling is one thing, and what the mind makes of it is completely separate. So the dukkha that is brought to an end by the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path is the second kind. You can't stop the pain of what's already been caused. You've been born, right? As a body, as a mind, you're alive. Ergo, it's going to hurt. There's going to be pain because we've been born. We have a body, we have a nervous system, we have a mind. Therefore, pain is going to arise. You can't uncause that, but you can change the way that the effects of those causes are received. And the more that there's that open-heartedness, this is just I have a body, I have a mind, so it gets sick. Like yesterday, my nose streaming and kind of feeling sickly. Then, you have a body. It's going to get ill sometimes. That's just part of the course. If you think it shouldn't be that way, you create dukkha. And so the Buddha said the first kind of dukkha is unavoidable. No one can dodge that arrow. Was the English he used. Right? That arrow hits everybody. But the second arrow is what the mind adds to it. It shouldn't be this way. When's it going to be over? This isn't fair. What can I do to get away from this? All that fretting, negotiating, stressing is the second arrow, which is the suffering that we create around a particular feeling. So that when we have a painful emotional habit, then patiently receiving the effects of that, and also what I find is the more fully we accept the painful consequences, and the less commentary we make about it, the more it's just that let it be felt fully and completely, then the more that the message gets through, the more we're disinclined to create the causes for that to happen in the future. If we get too busy with it, like, I shouldn't be feeling this, how can I stop this happening, it's my stupid fault, it's because I did this, and this, and I shouldn't do that. we can get sincerely kind of involved and busy with it, but rather, like I was saying about me and my problem, that unwittingly we can be creating more and more causes. How can I get rid of this? I shouldn't be this way. I'm supposed to be a monk. I shouldn't have these feelings. I should love everybody instead of being really irritated. And then the more commentary you make and the more busyness you create that is created around that dukkha feeling, then the more that the mind tends to create, this is me and my problem, or it creates that sense of how can I get rid of this? And so my experience is that the simpler we keep it, when there's an acknowledgement of the painful effects of some habit, then the more effectively it helps the habit to come to an end.
Can meditation give insight into what an enlightened mind might experience? So I'm thinking sort of in this world, in our lives. And what I was thinking of was, I think there's a form of one of the jhanas called cessation of feeling and thinking. So that Nirodha Samapata. And I was wondering more generally whether, in terms of what it's like to have an enlightened mind, whether certain meditations can give some flavour or insight into that.
I would say yes, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily connected to the cessation of perception and feeling. If all arahants didn't feel or perceive anything, there wouldn't have been very many teachings given. Yeah. The Buddha was an arahant, he was totally enlightened. He did a lot of talking and walking, decision making. He was an extremely creative person, and so that it's a mistake to think that the enlightened mind is sort of dissociated from the realm of perception and feeling intrinsically, and that's one particular level of say concentration. But I would say, and following along the teachings of, say, Ajahn Chara, Ajahn Buddhadasa, that in the experience of Nibbana, experience of the enlightened mind, is much more accessible than we realize. And that when the mind is free of grasping, is free of identification, as the Buddha said, that is Nibbana here and now. And when the heart is free of the conceit I am, that is Nibbana here and now. So that's not some sort of cosmic kind of flashbang event at some kind of great enlightenment moment only. But it's like Ajahn Buddhadasa would emphasize this a lot. He said there's this, what you can call a momentary Nibbana, or tadangana Nibbana, or momentary Nibbana. Whenever the mind is aware and free of conceit, right there is the experience of Nibbana. When there's a letting go of I and me and mine, then in that moment, when the heart is free of grasping, then there is the experience of clarity, of peacefulness, of selflessness, of complete simplicity. It's not an ecstatic state, it's a clear state. And so that I would say that it's highly possible to experience that for most people. And sometimes it's where people least expect it, often when they stop meditating. When the bell goes, and there's suddenly not me practicing. All the conditions are there, the mind has been awake, but the me practicing to be some way, there's often a kind of obstruction, a subtle obstruction. But oftentimes the most peaceful moment of the meditation, not just because people know their knees are going to be released from prison, but oftentimes, if you notice, often it's when you have and then the meditation's over, That's the most peaceful moment. I've noticed myself. I'm usually doing the bell rings, it doesn't quite work in the same way. But I feel it's a very important teaching. There's a short passage where the Buddha says that the cessation of grasping is deathlessness. Or also the nibbana is the cessation of becoming. And that so it can sound again like some sort of dramatic event, like a kind of grand, super duper enlightenment experience. But if you notice in meditation, when the mind is grasping something, is caught up with a thought or a sound or a feeling, and then the mind simply relaxes. Like say, I'm grasping this bell striker, so the mind is like just as if it was grasping a thought or a feeling, and it's clinging to it. There's a sense of tension, and agitation, and then there's noticing, oh, I'm really hanging on to this tightly. Then, oh, why not just relax? And then you don't have to throw it away, but just relaxing the grip. It's still holding it, but the mind is free of grasping. So that kind of temporary nibbana, or that tadangana vimutti, is also called, that temporary liberation. It's there whenever the mind is free of grasping. And the greater the freedom, the deeper and the greater the degree of freedom from grasping, then the more substantial and lasting that will be. But even if it's momentary, just in that, noticing that the mind's caught up with a sound or a feeling or a sensation, and then just that relaxing of the grip, just that, even if it's just for a second or half a second, if you pay attention, in that moment the mind is awake, there's no sense of identity, there's a complete simplicity, there's no thing wrong, no thing to do. Okay, back to the breath. I should be, in a sense, before all those I shoulds, or get on with the practice, in that moment of relaxation, there is the mind aware of the present. It's not a person, it's not a thing, there's no inside or outside, it's just this field of experience. The mind is awake, and then if attention is brought to that, then they can be seen, that's accessible a lot of the time. So it's not some kind of like super profound meditation experience. So like that quality of nirodha samapati is only supposed to be realizable by anagamis and arahants anyway. You'd have to be a non-returner to reach that level of concentration. But rather, it's the mind being free of grasping, even though the sense objects might be present. That I would say is the real taste of nibbana, or the taste of the enlightened mind.
Thank you very much, Mante, for the very valuable Dhamma talk. And something I was pondering throughout my youth was, is there like a connection between the Buddha's awareness, the universal awareness of Lord Buddha, and the awareness we gain in our life? Is there a kind of a connection when we attain some awareness? Then that awareness have kind of a connection with the awareness of Lord Buddha. It's something like that. Something was kind of pondering in my mind for some time.
Well, if every aspect of the mind and the body is an aspect of Dhamma, Dhamma is nature, then the nature that comprised the Buddha's body and mind, how could that be separate or different from the nature that comprises your body and mind? There's one natural order, so that insofar as every aspect of your physical, mental being is an aspect of Dhamma, and every aspect of the Buddha's nature and being is that aspect of Dhamma, then there's an intrinsic relatedness on that level. The people like the idea of sort of a kind of a connection with a kind of deity. That you've got a kind of cable, an Ethernet link to the Buddha. But I feel that it's more profound than that. It's more complete. Because if you just take that as a principle, that every aspect of my body and mind is an aspect of Dhamma. So my mind, when I look at my mind, I think of my thoughts, my feelings, my desires, my fears, my busyness, and I think that's who I am. But that's just the surface waves. If you consider the very fabric of your mind is Dhamma. Then the Dhamma is not something separate or remote or far away. It's waking up to what's already here, seeing beyond the surface level of the waves that cause Sumit region of the universe. But everything that I am, this mind is Dhamma. There isn't, the mind is not really a person. I make it all very personal. I say, I am Ajahn Amaro, I'm a person, I'm a man, I'm English. I'm a Buddhist monk, that's what I am. And we make it very personal, but every one of those thoughts or words is just an aspect of nature. The sounds that the mouth forms, the concepts of the mind forms, they are just patterns of nature arising and passing away, known by this awareness, which is also an aspect of nature. So that when I make a comment like every aspect, is there an aspect of your body and mind that is not part of nature? You say, oh yeah, right. It sounds like a little kind of, an interesting fact. But if you really let that sink in, it's like, oh, this mind is Dhamma. Oh. I tend to think of me, who likes, who dislikes, who wants, who doesn't want, who's got to get this or doesn't want to have that. And we get so the attention gets so fixated on the surface that we don't look at the very fabric. And when we take refuge in Dhamma, it's like taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, in a way it's reminding ourselves what's below the surface. That the fabric of reality is Dhamma. Not just reality of the world around us, but this body, this mind, everything that we are. The fabric of it is Dhamma, the substance. Buddha arises from the Dhamma, so that you can say that the primary activity of that quality, the primary activity of Dhamma is awareness. The Buddha arises from the Dhamma, or that primary activity, or the fundamental activity or function of Dhamma is awareness, knowing. And when the Buddha sees the Dhamma, what arises is the Sangha. So when the awake mind sees the way things are, then what arises is harmonious action. So that, I say your connection with the Buddha is that we're all made of the same stuff. It's not like an Ethernet cable to plugging this Sumit being into the Siddhartha Gautama being, but rather these are just, these lives are just waves on the ocean. So the ocean is all just the same salty water. The different shape of a wave and which way they move is just the shape of our particular lives. But the fundamental reality of what we are, what everything is the same, is that same reality, the same Dhamma. And on that note, I think that's probably enough for today. Thank you for your good questions and your attention. And I think the theme for next week is Mind is what matters, if I remember correctly. Is that right, Sir? Yeah. Mind is what matters. So we'll pursue some more of these themes in a useful way, I hope. So go well.